we have the great, debate. Well, Christians took Easter from us, and it's really Ostara, the Vernal Equinox, and, we honor the goddess Ostara, and she is the queen of Easter, and of the hair and the equinox, and blah, blah, blah. Kinda, yes and no. There are some things about Easter that begin and end with Christianity, and that, there is no pagan claim to. Other things, it's more like there were other traditions, other things, other deities at the time, and earlier in the calendar around the same time. Hey witches, blessed full moon,
and blessed lunar eclipse,
and welcome to an all-new episode of Spelling the HEKA-TEA with Marcus and Van. I'm Marcus.
And Amy Van.
And if you are joining us again, welcome back to our corner of the circle. And if this is your first time joining us, well, welcome to our corner of the circle. A little bit about me. I am a primarily queer horror author, witch, activist, and obviously, given the way I talk and the books I write, a defiant homosexual.
And I am a legal document specialist, a fiction editor as well. Obviously a witch. If you're sitting here, you know that. And as you can see from this face, a lipstick lesbian.
A gorgeous lipstick lesbian.
Oh.
If you enjoy what you see, then please like, comment, subscribe, and share. That is the most helpful thing that you could do. And if you are returning and you haven't done either of those things yet,
what are you doing?
Yeah, what are you doing? Why haven't you? Get on it. Well, as you can see by our entire getup, it is the Vernal Equinox special.
It is also known as Ostara.
Yes, or Ostara. And then later termed Easter. Now, there's a lot of debate there on what all of that means. There's a lot of myth. There's a lot of fact. We're going to get into all of
the
that.
above. All
of it. But of course, we couldn't do it without our Easter bunny ears.
No.
Ostara ears.
Exactly. Our hair crowns.
Our hair crowns. H-A-I-R and H-A-R-E.
Exactly. Hair in all of the ways.
In all of the ways. Yeah, and we have, the usual, we got our Astrology Mixology for March, halfway there, seeing where we've been, and now what we have left to go. Also, witchy news, and all things Ostara, including spellcraft, which this time we're actually going to be making something.
Yes, you will get to see our happy little bunny faces as we make you some eggs.
Correct. Some eggs, not the kind you eat. This is for magic.
Exactly.
So you're going to watch us do the wonderfully stressful but impressive task of carefully blowing out the yolks from the shells to ensure that the shells stay intact. You do not hard boil these, and then you paint them with your intention for the Vernal Equinox and what you want to manifest. And also they're great for decor. So, they two birds, one stone. Also, in Delicious Witch, we'll be taking the yolks from that and making a delicious, delicious Vernal Equinox or Ostara spring good morning brunch frittata.
Starry frittata, starry frittata, starry frittata.
Oh God, I'm not even going to attempt to try to repeat that.
Sorry,
yeah.
The theater woman in me had to come out for just a little second.
Oh, always. And then we will not be doing Pagan Invasion this time. We're going to take a break from that. Why? Because it's not cheery.
It's not.
Look at us. We're cheery.
Exactly. We do not want these beautiful bunny hats to be adulterated with Carol or Chuck's names.
Oh God, no. No, especially Dave Hunt.
Oh yeah.
Oh gosh. If you are like, what the hell are you talking about? Because this is your first time, then please, I encourage you, stop what you're doing, or when this episode is over, go back and watch our previous episodes and discover the magic disgustingness That is Pagan Invasion, volumes 1 through 13.
Yep.
We are currently on we just finished volume 5. We will be starting volume 6.
Yes. We're almost halfway there.
Almost.
And we certainly are living on a prayer to get through the rest.
At this point, yeah. So if you haven't checked it out, please go do so. It's a fun time. Yeah, so we're not going to do that this time, but we are still, of course, going to have Witchy Media Review. And what are we reviewing this episode?
We are reviewing the movie Chocolat with Juliette Binoche and Johnny Depp.
Love this movie, and
Love
it's
it so
all
much.
about kitchen witchery
Exactly.
and spring and abundance and just Dame Judi Dench.
And Alfred Molina. Oh my
Yeah,
God.
like it's just
I got such a talent crush on him.
Yes. Oh, it's a who's who of magic.
It
if
really
you
is.
haven't seen Chocolat,
Do it.
yeah, do it. We encourage you to. It'll put you in that
and read
magical
the
witchy.
book.
Yes.
Read the book. The book is amazing.
Yes. Do read the book.
One of the only movie book adaptations that I actually love both equally.
Agreed. Well, I would say Interview with the Vampire.
Oh yeah.
That
No, I didn't mean the only one, but one of the only ones.
for sure. Oh yeah. Well, there's so few and far between.
Yeah.
But I was agreeing with you because I couldn't think of other one, and I was like, well, no, Interview with the Vampire. So too. I'm sure I think of more as you go down the list,
Oh,
but
yeah.
we don't have time for that.
No.
We are actually this time not going to kick off and yes, we are wearing these throughout the entire special,
Yes.
with the exception of Delicious Witch, because we'd have to put holes in our conical chef hats,
Yes.
and this is not worth that.
No.
So that's not. So Delicious Witch, there will be no bunny ears. Pretend that they're hidden under the conical hat. Actually, honestly, I feel like the hat would actually fit over the ears.
Oh, but
based on,
they're too wiry.
yeah, but you could
Yeah,
fit them
you
in.
can make it work.
And then, so who knows? Maybe
Yeah.
the ears will still be present.
Oh my God! And if we can make that work, we can pull them off at the end, and that can be like the rabbit out of the hat.
Oh my God! Let's
Yes.
see if that happens.
Stay tuned. And
Stay
we'll find
tuned.
out.
Yeah, so let's get into it. We're going to actually kick it off with Astrology Mixology first instead of Witchy News. And that's just a whole logistical situation with the topics and blah, blah, blah. So it's whatever. So, anywho. It's Astrology Mixology for March. Again, if you have watched all these episodes, you understand why we do it in the middle of the month. If you're new here, just briefly, it's because I feel like there's a thread of validity to astrology and things that you can see when you are able to kind of look back and connect the dots and then say, oh yeah, that did happen 2 weeks ago or 3 days ago on this day, or oh, that was that energy I was feeling. Shit, okay. And then you're like, well, I better find out what's going to happen the rest of the month. So that's just my own personal little thing. It's not for any other reason than my preference on how I like to present it, because I'm a person who, it's about synchronicity.
Yeah.
So if you can present that by the middle of the month, then there you go. So March. This is the time of Aries that is named for the war god Mars. My name is Marcus, which is a derivative of the god Mars.
And I am an Aries.
She's an Aries. I have an Aries moon.
So it's really our special time.
It is. So this month started out with us all still in Pisces season, keeping us all in our feelings. But with March comes fiery Aries, and a bunch of planetary dancing begins to happen. So March 1st, Venus has entered the retrograde. So moving in reverse for the next 6 weeks. So you may have been feeling like you're preparing to explore you've been exploring your relationships, even down to superficial things like your health and beauty regimes, like physical beauty routines, and your overall values are just kind of all being in question. So yeah, I definitely understand that. March 3rd, Mercury entered Aries, making us all feel headstrong and hasty in how we think and communicate our feelings and needs to other people. And even to ourselves. Like, Mercury retrograde is just that thing.
Yeah.
Just that thing that we all have to deal with. There are some good parts to it, but really, it causes a lot of upheaval when otherwise there wouldn't be.
Right.
All because of stupid miscommunication situations. So just make sure your texts are saying and expressing things the way you really want them to, your DMs, etc. Any way you talk or communicate, just make sure that this time you are really thinking about everything you do and say before you open your mouth.
Yes.
Because you don't want things to get lost in translation and then real, genuine relationships gone, destroyed, ruined because of Mercury retrograde nonsense.
Which happened to me the last Mercury retrograde. I
That's
had a
right.
breakup after about 7 months together.
Yeah. So it's real.
Yeah.
All the time. We all feel it. March 7th, Aries returned in a trine aspect position with the sun. So a trine is a 120-degree angle between two planets or celestial alignments or bodies, or points on a birth chart. So this is extremely lucky and beneficial. So this may be where and why you're finding your passions again with a new drive towards success and manifestation and making them happen. On March 12th, the sun aligned with Saturn in Pisces, putting us in the position then to take care of what we were feeling the previous week in terms of like a renewed sense of drive and our creative endeavors and passions and things we want to achieve. And now, March 12th, this week, we've been feeling very much like putting in the practical steps to make that happen. And the reason you're feeling that is because the sun aligned with Saturn in Pisces on March 12th. So that's why this shift has now happened, where you're now feeling more focused on the things you're trying to achieve. So tonight, the full moon. This is also the lunar eclipse, and this is in Virgo. So tune into your intuition, tune into the divine tonight. Listen to the spirits, your ancestors, if you communicate with one or the other. But tonight, listen. During the eclipse, listen. And prepare to get in the headspace to cut yourself and everyone else you know and love some slack. Mercury retrograde literally kicks off the next day. So, so just prepare yourself, listen to the divine, seek guidance, what you need to do tonight to really tune in and figure out a pathway to navigate understanding for everybody. Because it's about to get real messy for everybody. And remember, you also want people to cut you the same slack and give you the same grace, because you're also going to fuck up and probably say and do things that are off kilter, and because of this retrograde. So just make sure you're granting space. So tonight, listen to the spirits, to your ancestors, ask for advice, seek how to hone in, and just tune into that piece to carry you through. Get that advice. So that way you don't burn any bridges that you don't want to burn. March 15th, Mercury enters retrograde officially. So prepare for about 6 weeks of confused emotion, oversensitivity, feeling off, chronic fatigue, and chronic miscommunication. March 20th, it's the Vernal Equinox. Ostara, however you want to call it. Aries also begins this day. Woo! These astrological alignments will give us all a much needed boost of drive and desires to carve out new paths for ourselves. And this first week in Aries has an energetic help that will help make all of this possible. We give a little energetic boost the first week of Aries. So March 22nd, the sun in Aries aligned with Venus. March 24th, the sun will then also align with Mercury. So then they will both be in alignment, and Venus and Mercury will move back into Pisces on March 27th and through the 29th. So take time between the 22nd of March and the 27th of March to check in with yourself and your loved ones, and make sure you are all grounded in all these things before the retrogrades begin to really shift everything. March 29th, a solar eclipse rises, and this will be the last one to take place in Aries for more than half a decade.
Oh.
Yeah, this is literally that last push to embrace the fiery, independent nature you've developed over the course of the past couple of years. March 30th, Neptune moves from Pisces into Aries, switching signs for the first time since 2011. So while Neptune will briefly retrograde back into Pisces on October 22nd, this new shift for Neptune will likely influence us to take a more proactive role in our spiritual practice or journey and towards manifesting our deepest desires and goals. And that's it.
Okay. Well, that is a very exciting time that we have coming up.
That is.
I know. I already feel the fires a kindling.
Same. I'm like, oh, that time is coming.
Exactly.
And we're also where we live. We have what's called false spring, which is happening right now.
Exactly.
And it feels nice.
It really does.
It's nice and warm.
Especially since it was snowing not too long ago.
Yeah, just like 2-3 weeks ago.
Yeah.
So nice change.
Exactly. Well, that brings us to our witchy news.
Yes.
And I will get that kicked off to start with. So there was something that happened in Glasgow, Scotland, which is very exciting.
Mm-hmm.
So there is a new Scottish tartan that was created to honor those executed for witchcraft.
Oh, cool.
Yeah. So this was concocted by a group called the Witches of Scotland. And that is a movement basically striving to get justice for those who were accused and convicted under the Witchcraft Act of 1563 to 1736.
Ooh.
Yeah, long stretch of time.
Yes it was.
But it's great that this organization is now seeking to, at least do what we can from this modern standpoint to right the wrong.
Yeah, agreed.
So that's awesome. So they created this new tartan design. It was registered on the Scottish Register of Tartans on February 11th of this year. As a living memorial developed by Claire Mitchell and Zoe Vendizzotti. I'm sure I am butchering her last name.
Apologies
if somehow you're watching this. But it had a really cool design, and a lot of thought clearly went into it. So it's got black and gray to represent the ashes of those burned. Red for the bloodshed. pink to represent the legal tapes binding trial documents then as well as now.
Mm-hmm.
And the thread count, this is actually very interesting. They used the numbers 1563 and 1736 to represent the year that it started and ended, which I thought was really cool. And then as well, 173 black squares went into it to represent the 173 years that the act was in force.
Wow.
So I think that's really beautiful.
That is, and that is some magic right there. That is some witchcraft right there.
Yes.
Just the threading, the significant number of the threading, and
yeah,
it's real like memorializing there. And I feel like it's a duty for every witch to fucking get a scarf, get a drapery in this tartan.
Exactly.
Like I know I will be.
Oh
like,
yeah, absolutely.
I want to get me some drapery in that tartan.
Yes.
To some current witch trials. So the pagan community of Picken, South Carolina, are on high alert after a very frightening confrontation at the market on the mill. It's like a bizarre shopping center, vendor antique, boutique type situation. The threat comes from Stillwater Christian Fellowship, who at the local market event approached at least one vendor, a Wiccan, selling occult and pagan, Wiccan, witchcraft supplies, along with pagan supporters and other witches, Wiccans, pagans, etc., and began harassing them, condemning them to hell, and citing Exodus, chapter 22, verse 18, the infamous and mistranslated verse, "Thou shalt not suffer a witch to live." Repeatedly at a public event. These members of this church, in official church going field trip capacity, were chanting over and over again, "Thou shalt not suffer a witch to live." Now, to be clear, the actual translation before King James famously got his hands on it in the 1500s and changed it was actually, "Thou shalt not suffer a poisoner to live." So someone who tastes the food for royalty before they eat it, in case it was poison. And if it was, you wouldn't suffer them to live. God's
because they were dead.
Commandment, you would put them out of their misery if they didn't die immediately. You wouldn't suffer them to live through it. Yeah. So the vendor was apparently targeted specifically, so they knew that this was going on, and chose this vendor. Stillwater's Christian Fellowship actually admitted to doing it. On February 18th, on a YouTube video titled "Witches Be Crazy" with Pastor Barry Vaughn, was released by Kevin Hardin of Gaining Ground Ministries. They admit in this video to going and evangelizing at the event. Initially, they were outside the event, but that wasn't enough, of course. They had to go in and escalate and harm others because the Spirit of the Lord, of course, told them to. They were asked to leave. Following the backlash of their disgusting behavior, they actually doubled down on all of it through sermons, podcasts, and videos where members called on pastors to chase the wolves out, which is an openly coded phrase that refers to witches, LGBT folk, and abortion supporters. The church, who has been able to have a spot in the market for free in the past to have worship, which on its own, like, you should make them pay like everybody else. I'm sorry. This is a shopping market. Like, I don't want to be seeing that. That offends me. But they've now had that right revoked. Vaughn seized on this and claims that evil witches harassed the landlord into kicking these good Christians out of their place of worship in the middle of the Bible Belt. Heaven forbid. Yeah, so...
I wish I could smack them around with their Bible belt.
Yeah, we kept warning that this was going to happen. Yeah. That with Trump, with Project 2025, with the thing, their Christian nationalism has a very extensive reach. And we said, is it going to be witchcraft shop owners, vendors, sellers, etc., places of worship? And yeah, it is.
Yeah. Coming out of Baripada, India.
Okay.
A man named Devendra Naik and his wife Champa were axed to death on suspicion of practicing witchcraft.
Oh God.
Yeah. He was in the garden, like watering his flowers with his wife. His daughter-in-law and his little, like, 1 to 2 year old grandchild were in the house at the time.
Oh shit.
Yes. And so they're in the garden just enjoying their day, and this other man from the same town, AJ Naik, came up and assaulted Devendra with an axe to the head. He chased Champa inside, and that's where he killed her as well. Basically, the backstory to this was that AJ's father had been ill for some time. AJ went to a healer, oddly.
Right.
Because that's fine. So he goes to this healer, and the healer tells him that Devendra and Champa were performing black magic on his father. So he went and decided to kill them, and he did it. He's been arrested in connection, and he admitted it right off the bat and told the story of why.
So, for more cheery news, undocumented pagans, Wiccans, witches, polytheists of all kinds, and others of minority religions and faiths fear for their sacred tools and texts and fear discrimination in ice raids. Hector, and it's not his real name, is a priest in the Lukumi tradition, Santeria tradition, and he's also undocumented from Cuba. And of course, he fears for safety. He fears about being deported. But in that fear, he's also extremely worried about all these sacred objects that he inherited because it is a hereditary inherited tradition for most people, or for a lot of people. And even if it's not through blood, usually the priest or priestess before you is passing down things to you that was passed down to them, and so on and so on. And these are all sacred. And, he's afraid, of course, that something's going to happen to these objects because, you can't trust ice to take care of these items. And a law was passed. The Republicans are trying to pass a law like for respect for like religious things, like items, objects, etc. during like police raids, things like that. But it's very like Abrahamic, Judeo-Christian centric focus. So there's nothing really in there that gives any like relief to witches, santeros, pagans, voodoos, etc. In terms of sacred objects or anything. Nadia is another one. She's a Wiccan. She's from Eastern Europe. It did not say where she is here in the U.S., but and it's probably not her real name. But she's a bartender, and she's Wiccan, and she is worried about the same thing. She has her sacred tools. She, she has her consecrated objects and items. And so these people are talking about how them and so many other polytheists, pagans, witches, etc. Or when they're talking to their friends and loved ones, about the possibility of being caught, deported, detained, whatever, they're including, like, here's where I store my magical tools, here's where I store these consecrated items, like, get them to me, blah, blah, blah. Like, it's just heartbreaking.
It really is.
That gets us kind of to our main topic in terms of witchy news. Main topic? What do you mean? Usually you guys just have, well, no. This is we just had a couple headlines, but we kind of have a bigger issue topic that we wanted to discuss because it is news, it is headlines. And it kind of relates to what we were talking in the last episode in regards to our main story and then the actual main story, which was about reclaiming faith and the language of faith and some of the things that kind of go on that make it hard for people to take us seriously in terms of when we talk about our faith and how deep and personal our faith is, if we're pagan, polytheists, whatever. One of those things was how people are kind of making up deities and they're worshiping not the Thor or the Loki from actual reality and history, but from the comic books.
I just saw a post while I was scrolling Facebook the other day, and it was going on and on about how Elizabeth Taylor is this person's pagan goddess.
Yeah, no, you can't do that.
No.
Like, so, yeah, you can't do that. And I'm sorry, don't be like, oh, but you can make an egregore. No, it takes collective conscious thought and feeling and belief, etc., and energy from millions upon millions of trillions upon trillions of people throughout history creating this.
Exactly.
You just because you and maybe 4 other people believe that Queen Beryl from Sailor Moon is a dark goddess does not make her a dark goddess. She's just a freaking anime character.
Exactly.
She's just a comic manga character. That's it. So that also touches on another thing that goes on in the community, which is deity hopping. What is deity hopping? Deity hopping is kind of a twofold thing. It's not waiting for any type of deity to reach out to you, call to you in very definitive, unquestionable ways, signs, synchronicities, readings, link, whatever, that you're like, oh shit, this deity is like, I choose you, I want to work with you. And it can take years before another deity walks into your life. Like, it could be decades before that happens. It's never just suddenly you have a pantheon of all these deities you work with.
No.
Like, no. But there are people who just kind of, that's what they do. They collect deities, they just go, oh, I'm working with that one, I'm working with that one, and I'm just going to go do this, put them on the altar. Then there's the deity hopping, where witches who know better hop from deity to deity to get something out of them. They get something out of them, hell, they'll even maybe feign devotion and worship over time because that was the deal made. But once they achieve or get their ultimate goal of what they want,
they don't care
they don't care about that deity, and they peace out and they hop to another one to get something from that deity as well. This, again, how does this contribute? How do these things contribute to not being taken seriously? Well, it's in the same way that great cousin, I can turn whatever I want into a deity is, which is it looks fucking silly. It shows, you say, okay, you have faith and that you are deep and spiritual and rooted in something, but you are not committed. You go from one deity to the next. Like
it's the people who say, oh, I want to get some dick tonight, so I'm suddenly dedicated to Aphrodite.
Right, right. And you're gonna like
versus where she's never called to you at all.
Right, right. And that's fine if you're like, I'm gonna go work with you. But the thing is what people don't understand is deities, a lot of deities demand actual devotion.
Yes.
Like there are some deities who are like, sure, you can just hop in and do something and then peace the fuck out. But certain deities require and demand a shit ton of devotion, and not in a temporary way.
No.
Not at all in a temporary way, but in a dedicated, you commit yourself to me, and this means you are ride or die for me, and remember what I give, I can take away.
Exactly.
And so don't fuck with me.
Right.
Like and as long as you don't fuck with me, I will love you and take care of you. I will have your back. Just don't betray me. And don't just use me. Don't come to me feign devotion, pretend that you are committed to me, and keep using me to get what you want in exchange for the devotion I see you're giving. And then once you get what you ultimately want, or what you wanted to ultimately achieve through my blessings, don't, peace out. And just disappear and drop me. Like, that's not cool, and I don't like that. And a lot of deities, more often than not, that is how they are. They're not a casual hangout. They're if you're going to work with me, then you're going to work with me until I say I'm done.
Exactly.
Until I walk away. Yeah, so why is this being talked about right now? Because there is actually someone in the news who is literally a high-profile witch who is doing this right now. And to tell us more is Evan.
Yeah. The person that we are referring to is the drag queen Jinx Monsoon.
Yes.
So she recently changed her legal name. The first name is Hera, paired with the middle name Lilith.
So wrong for so many reasons.
I am devoted to Hera since I was a little child. You were the same way with HEKA-TEA.
Correct.
Backstory, so Jinx has been very vocal over the years about her dedication to HEKA-TEA. She dedicated her drag race win to her.
Correct.
There have been many posts on her social media showing her HEKA-TEA altars, talking about her devotion for her, all of these things. With the exception of her line of perfume, which was titled Hera. I have never, and certainly anyone who has seen otherwise, please correct me if I'm wrong, but I have never personally seen her reference Hera's name in her social media presence, in anything that she's appeared in. So
she never talked about her on Drag Race. She mentioned HEKA-TEA, or HEKA-TEA, as she would say.
So for me, I was a little shocked. So of course I read the article immediately. And I was very shocked to hear her statement in this article, stating that, since she was a little boy reading Greek mythology, she knew that Hera was her queen.
Right.
This is very perturbing to me because she has been so vocal about HEKA-TEA.
Correct.
She has never...
Contrary.
Exactly. And she has never mentioned Hera, to my knowledge, other than in the context of her perfume.
No.
Right off the bat, that's where I thought it was a little odd. That Jinx was talking about this deity whom I've never heard her mention beyond the perfume.
Right.
She continued to go on speaking about Hera. It was fairly clear to me that she was exalting her dark aspects, her vengeance, all of that.
Her jealousy.
Yes. But she wasn't really addressing the other aspects of who Hera is, because her whole thing is that, she will be petty, she will react to something that has been done to her. But other than that,
fuck around and find out. Right.
Yeah, fuck around. Yeah, she's that goddess for sure. But outside of that area of her, she is a very loving, protective mother goddess. And I almost never see people addressing that side of her. So when I heard Jinx say, oh, I've loved her since childhood, I was expecting to hear about all of her aspects.
Right.
And I didn't. And that was a little
something that would acknowledge that she had a deeper understanding, connection, relationship.
Right.
Like when I talk about HEKA-TEA, the last thing I talk about is that she is the queen of witchery and that she's the witchcraft goddess. I talk about her as the Sotiera, the savior. I talk about her as the way, the creatrix of the universe, the great tormentor, I talk about I think about all these, to me, the most amazing aspects are above and beyond the Queen of Night witchcraft.
Exactly.
She's freaking also HEKA-TEA of the sun.
Exactly.
HEKA-TEA Krateas. Everyone's like, oh, HEKA-TEA of the night. I wake up and I do a greeting to her as the bearer of the sun and the dawn.
Yes.
Like, she is like, and yet and so for me, yeah, same thing. Like, but when I hear someone talk at a surface level, yeah, like Jinx really never talked about her as the Queen of Witches, Queen of Night, which I love.
Right.
That's one of the things I love about being a witch is, normally I'm not really in pastels. Like, I love the spooky aspect of being a witch. I just like to keep it fashion, but I love the spooky aspects of the witcheries, and that's certainly how HEKA-TEA first came to me, was very much the epitome of the witch, and what you would imagine a witch to be, and she was the queen of all witches and the grand high witch, and she was all those things for me as a little boy, because that's how I could easily translate her. But as I grew up and my journey grew with her, I grew to understand her more, and so I don't really talk about that anymore when I talk about her. I'm exalting her real primordial truth.
Exactly.
So yeah, I get it.
So yeah, with the deity hopping, I don't like that she was so into HEKA-TEA for such a long time, and then suddenly, drop of a hat, it's Hera, whom I can't find any evidence of her talking about being devoted to. It's just
let's look for it.
Right.
Let's try again.
No.
Third time's a charm. We're witches. Third time's a charm. Let's try again. Power of 3. Let's see. 404.
404. Oh man.
Not found.
Well, 404. That does add up to 8, and 8 is Hera's sacred number. So I think that right there is a message.
Yeah, Hera's calling her out.
Exactly. But anyways, so we've discussed that whole aspect of why we find this inappropriate.
Yeah.
The next aspect that I personally would like to get into is, and this is an opinion that we both share, but we think that it's a little disrespectful to use a deity's actual name when pick any deity, and there are many options for names that share the derivation with the root of their name, with their epithets. There are so many ways to make an honor name to your deity without using their name as your own.
Correct.
And that goes for people picking names for themselves or for their children.
Correct.
I think you are not a god, your child is not a god.
No.
And to say that is very disrespectful to the deity in question.
Yeah, it's not honoring the deity. And if you go look traditionally back into the myths and things like that, it was usually considered a scene of arrogance.
Yes.
And would actually sometimes condemn your child to be murdered by said deity for the bearing of said name, or you or the child, depending on, would be cursed for bearing the deity's name.
Exactly.
Directly. Like, to honor them, that is why epithets were there. That is why etymological, like your middle name Catherine, is a derivative of HEKA-TEA, but it's not HEKA-TEA.
Right.
Catherine was to honor.
Right. My name is not even HEKA-TEA.
Right. It's like, I'm Marcus. I am not Mars. And in ancient a child, a son was not named Mars.
No.
It was named Marcus.
Exactly.
Because if you named your child Mars, it was believed that your child was cursed. Like, you didn't fuck around. Like, you honored the deity by a derivative of their name, not by naming the child their actual name.
Exactly. And I actually see this trend of like deity names so often in people who aren't even polytheistic, who don't follow these deities. And I cannot get over how disrespectful that is as someone who actually does have deities that I follow and is a pagan. I think it's so inappropriate. Like, you don't turn around and name your child Yahweh,
Right.
So anyway, bringing this kind of back to a personal story as well. As a Hera devotee who is also about to be embarking on an IVF journey and is also a little bit of an etymology nerd in general, like, I have been looking at Hera-inspired baby names for my own purposes. So,
can you give us a few examples?
Yeah, I was going to get into that actually. I have kind of a list. I will be as brief as possible. You could do one of her epithets. You could do something related to the root of her actual name, which I'm going to get into in a second because I do find it very interesting.
Yeah.
Or you could always do anything related to like her sacred objects or her legends, blah, blah, blah.
Right.
So for a couple of those, the first one that I thought was very interesting, I'll leave this name I heard for the first time in the TV show Skins, the British one.
Oh,
I'm obsessed with that show. I absolutely love it. I have watched every episode numerous times. But the mom of one of the characters in the show is named Anthea. And I remember the first time that I saw an episode, I was like, that's such a beautiful name, and I had never heard it before. And I guess it's more common in the UK than it is over here. But on my researches lately, I looked it up, and I found that Hera Anthea was one of her epithets.
Oh.
And it means Hera of the flowers.
Oh, I like that.
Yeah. So if you think about like the word chrysanthemum, like,
right.
And yeah, so with that meaning, that obviously refers to her fertility aspects, you know, blossoms, fertility, blah, blah, blah. So I thought that was really cool, and I love the name. There's also Hera Calistophanos, which means Hera the beautifully crowned. So with that, you could do Callista Stephanie or Stephanie Callista. Little note with that, I would not use Callista without the presence of Stephanie, because Callisto in Greek mythology was also one of Zeus's lovers that she had to punish. So if it weren't like, if the names aren't together, I don't think she would like it.
Yeah.
But if they are together, then it would obviously be a reference to Callistophanos, which belongs to her. So that's great. And this one, I might honestly cry when I talk about it. But another of her epithets was Hera Alexandros, which means Hera the Defender. So any like Alex, Alexandra, Alessandra, any of those names will refer to that. And the reason that it kind of makes me a little emotional is because the name that I had picked for my child that I later lost was Alexei. And I had had that name in my head since, I mean, about the same time as Hera first came to me. When I was around 8 is when I first started falling in love with that name, and I always had it in my mind for a future child. So of course, when that happened for me the first time, I was like, F's what I want to use. And of course, that child is no longer with me, unfortunately. But you know, finding this root really makes me feel so comforted, because I get to know that my little boy is not lost. He's just on Hera's lap.
Right. So that's beautiful.
That's very special to me. There's one name that is a flower name that has been associated with all of the above, and that name is Susanna. Which I personally love, because I myself am descended from a Mayflower passenger named Susanna White. And she was pregnant during the journey, and like right as the ship was docking at Plymouth, she gave birth to her son, named Peregrine White, and she survived the first winter, but her husband didn't, and so she remarried in the spring. So she was actually the first Mayflower mother and the first Mayflower bride. And Hera ruling over both childbirth and marriage. That makes sense. Like I really is very special to me, because if you do your family tree, you know these stories. Like for me, it really makes me aware that I actually come from a long line of women who have been touched by Hera's love, and I love that so much.
And then I wonder how far back that actually goes through your genealogy.
And clearly, like it has skipped generations. Like I definitely don't think my mom is.
But my other beat with that, aside from the HEKA-TEA part of it, which I will circle back to, is just showing how ignorant you are. How she just did not think about pairing Hera and Lilith together as names. It's disrespectful on kind of both ends, and here is why. So Lilith, aka Lilitu, Lilith, is a figure mostly in Mesopotamian and Jewish mythology. She is mentioned primarily in Jewish myth, though many rabbinic authorities at this point reject even her existence, because she's mentioned only like once, and it's very obscurely how she's referenced. In the Akkadian world, Lilu is related to the Hebrew word Lilith, which is thought to be a night bird, mostly probably a screech owl. In cuneiform texts of ancient Sumer, Assyria, and Babylonia, Lilitu is a malicious spirit or demon, and it is a class of them. It's not one, it is a class of them. Lilitus are a class of demons. There's a bunch of them. They're not one entity, and some connect her to the demon goddess Lama-Atsu, as they're very similar. So Lama-Atsu was described as having the head of a lion, the teeth of a donkey, naked breasts, a hairy body, hands stained with blood, long fingers and nails, and the taloned feet of the eagle demon Anzu. She feeds on the blood of human infants. She is the slayer and tormentor of demons, unborns, neonates. She is the eater of men and drinker of blood. She is the bringer of night terrors. She is the killer of foliage and crops, infesting rivers and lakes, and a bringer of pestilence, sickness, and death. Pazuzu, yes, Pazuzu of Exorcist fame, is actually her brother and her mortal enemy. So Pazuzu is the demon god of the easterly winds, and is actually known for bringing plague and famine, and if he's pissed, you don't want to mess with him. Like, he's got his moments where he just is like, I'm gonna do my shit, and it's not good. But he actually protects children, mothers, and others from her. He does not harm or possess children, just to get that out of the way. That's actually Lama-Atsu, or Lilith, or Lilitu, who does that. And the legend of Lilith didn't even fully develop until the Middle Ages. So we're talking the 13th century. The writings of Isaac ben Jacob HaKohen is where we get Lilith leaving Eden and leaving Adam after refusing to be subservient to him and not do it missionary style. She was like, I'm going to ride you. And he was like, no, girl, I want to be on top. I will not be ridden. Which, I'm sorry, but you technically do all the work.
Right.
Like, why would you, like, most guys now like to be the one to lay down and just lay there. Not me, but that's because I'm a bottom. So obviously, I'm aware of many a man, unfortunately, who just likes to lay there now. And we all, if we take it from a man, we all know what I'm talking about. So she was like, no, I'm not going to do that. She pieced out of Eden and then bedded with the archangel Samael, and then, yeah, that was 13th century. That's not actually in biblical texts about that happening. In Isaiah 34:14, the name appears amongst a list of animals. Again, more than likely a screech owl. Jewish incantation bowls and amulets reference the Lilith, again, plural, Lilith, not one, starting from the 1st century to the 8th century. So again, nothing pre-Christian of her exists, right? She's not even a pre-Christian deity. Like, so according to scholar Sigmund Hurwitz, the Jewish Lilith is connected to the Greek Lamia. This is according to one scholar. This is where one source states she is the daughter of HEKA-TEA. Though this is paper thin, and is more likely due to the suppression and demotion of the supreme and boundless goddess that HEKA-TEA was, and turning her into nothing more than a demon queen. HEKA-TEA, of course, does not share Lilith's actual traits in any way, shape, or form. Another source, and here we go with Hera, and why Jinx, I think, is just a blessed be in a lot of ways, and I think she's just playing around here and deity hopping. Another source is that the Lamia, so the Lamia, again, are like kind of like vampiric, like Empusa in Greece. They're a vampiric demon class. And there's also a single Lamia who then gives birth to other Lamia or whatever. It's kind of a convoluted how that happens. But anyway, with the Lamia one person, Hera slew all of her children except Scylla. Scylla. Thank you.
You're welcome.
And out of anger that she and Zeus were knocking sandals. The grief made Lamia turn into a monster and devour children. Taking pity, Zeus gave her the gift of second sight. But part of her curse from Hera, or as a result of her affair, she could never shut her eyes, making her obsess over her dead children and her hatred of Hera. Again, taking pity on her, Zeus gave her the ability to remove and replace her eyes from her sockets. Yeah, so there's the only connection, which again is loose, because Lilith, clearly, as we know her, is a 13th century invention. Plain and simple.
Yeah.
Before then, she's a bird. Her name is possibly derived from a class of ancient Mesopotamian demons, and or also from this demon goddess who is the sister of Pazuzu. But no matter the iteration, first of all, there's no yay we get along, me and Hera, if she is Lamia. If you were going to say, well, yeah, her and Lamia are the same. Okay, cool. Well then, why are you pairing that with Hera back to back? That's so disrespectful to both of them. That's disrespectful. If you're going to say, if you're like, well, it's referring, I see Lilith as it means Lamia. Well, then you're disrespecting Lamia by pairing your name with Hera. And then in turn, if that's how you're seeing it, you are disrespecting Hera by pairing it with this woman who reminds her yet again of her husband's chronic infidelities. So that doesn't work. Then if you're going with just Lilith as in the dark whatever, there is no iteration of Lilith in any culture, however you want to try to take her name, that has any positive or redeeming qualities. And to be honest, I don't understand this worship of Lilith, this devotion to Lilith, invocation of Lilith. There's literally nothing positive about her. You want to talk about deception by demons. Like,
right.
You have been deceived into turning her into some feminist, like, deity that she is not.
No.
Like, she is the devourer of souls. If you want to take her back to ancient Mesopotamia, ancient Sumer, and Assyria, fine. Then she is still the devourer of souls and children. She is plague and pestilence. There is nothing good about her. She is the one who would possess Reagan. And funny enough, we also in this research learned that the demon that possesses the two girls in Exorcist Believer, the newest one, was actually Lama-Atsu, not Pazuzu.
Right.
And we are confirmed in Believer that the demon possessing the two girls is the same demon that possessed Reagan. So it was not Pazuzu. Believe it, we're going to have a whole Exorcist deep dive special on all of this. Hashtag justice for Pazuzu.
Exactly.
Back to this, though. There is no iteration of Lilith that is positive, a blessing, anything that you want to invoke, bring into your life, worship. There isn't. Now, if you actually are like, well, Marcus, Evan, I want to murder my neighbor's children. I want to have my sister's husband killed. Like, so I want to invoke Lilith to do this. Then rock out with your conical out.
But as a little caveat to that, don't pair it with Hera.
Right.
Because Lilith is the destroyer and eater of children, and Hera is a protector of children.
That makes no
she
fucking
would
sense.
be appalled.
Correct.
Like
you're not honoring Hera, and you're not. You're nowhere are you doing. Are you honoring Hera, who you claim to be your queen? Which, circling back to the HEKA-TEA of it all again. This is new. This statement of Hera being her queen, we learn in her announcement of the legal name change.
Right.
Up until then, post upon post upon post of HEKA-TEA, thanking HEKA-TEA on fucking Drag Race All-Stars. She has now, and I dug deep, I went and looked, she has scrubbed her social of all things HEKA-TEA.
Mm-hmm.
Why? Could it be because she figured someone was going to question, well, what do you mean, like, Hera's your queen? Like, all you ever do is talk about and post about HEKA-TEA. Like, what? Like, so now you suddenly are like, oh, Hera's my queen since being a child, but you don't know enough about this goddess that you claim is mother to you, your queen. You don't know enough about her to know not to pair an etymological derivative of Lamia, association Lamia, Lilith, to her name, attach it to her name, and then on top of that, you took her actual name and just you didn't do a derivative, you didn't do something with an etymological, syntactical relationship, you just said Hera. So, and Hera is one of those deities that you do not take her name.
No.
Outright. Like, you don't.
No.
Like, she's famously, you don't.
She will fuck you up.
You don't do that. She's vain in that way. Like, there are things where she is like, I am the queen of Olympus. And certain things I see as you trying to reach for my crown.
Yeah.
And taking her name is one of those things. Mm-hmm. And she's famously, she's one of those deities that famously curse those that are committing blasphemy, which that is what this is seen as doing. Mm-hmm. It's not rebellious. It's not cool. No. You're not respecting. And look, who are we? Jinx is Jinx. Like, ironically from Seattle and lived in my best friend's building. And
as being a local queen, like, we were so excited to see her.
She was one of my favorites. Exactly. She's been up until this moment. Yeah. One of my favorites.
Loved her.
And I am completely disappointed and shocked and let down and confused. Mm-hmm. As a HEKA-TEAN, I'm confused. She's like, she's never going to have to do a Work the World tour or anything again at this point. Right.
And HEKA-TEA helped her do that.
HEKA-TEA helped her get there all the way, and she was vocal about constantly thanking HEKA-TEA for it. On her social, very open about HEKA-TEA got me here. And then suddenly the perfume drops. Mm-hmm. And then there's nothing until 2 weeks ago where she mentions the name change.
My other issue with this whole thing is that the only reference that she has made to Hera is the perfume. And I don't see how it's a coincidence that the updated perfume line drops, then she takes her name as her own. I really do think that the two facts are related.
Yeah, and the thing is these are goddesses who are very famous for what I give, I can take, and I will take.
Exactly.
And I will take in an instant. Mm-hmm. Now, of course, in this day and age of social media and pop culture and everything else, unless something horrendous happens, I think there's only so much knocking down a peg or two that could sustainably be done in that situation. I think just by our culture alone at this point, like, Jinx is always going to be famous, and it's always have her fans, and that's fine. I don't wish her ill.
No, not at all.
I'm sitting here going like, girl, I respected you. I looked up to you as a queer person. Mm-hmm. You're an outspoken witch and drag queen and HEKA-TEA witch at that, and a queer HEKA-TEA witch, which I thought was so important because, again, and I'm rattling that ceremonial bell about it every single time, that, like, the visibility of queer, trans, and queer gay male and queer witches in general need to be more seen and visible and get more attention, and so we can claim our place not only in the current witchcraft community and culture world, it's occult world, etc., but also to bring honor and justice to our history and claim our place in the history of not just the witch persecutions, the witch trials, the witch genocide, but also in the ancient temples. Almost all, like, HEKA-TEA's temples, Kybele, which there's a whole relationship there to the ancient goddess Kybele with HEKA-TEA, that in the HEKA-TEA of it all special we'll explain this all. But
Just like Clarissa.
Just like Clarissa. But not scary Christian like she's become.
No. Clarissa?
Clarissa. It'll be Clarissa Explains It All. Oh my god, we have to title the episode special that. Clarissa Explains It All. In her temples, like, it was queer men.
Yeah.
In a lot of in HEKA-TEA's temple, queer men. In a lot of the temples of the goddesses, the mother goddesses, the primordial goddesses, the Magickal, a lot of that, they were not, if they were not female only, then the men who served were almost all the time queer and had to be queer, had to be orchestrati, which they were still queer though, because they were still servicing men and they were sacred prostitutes.
Right.
And they loved it. Like, and they were willingly doing it. Like, it was pretty much, if you were going to serve in the, and even in Rome, when they brought the goddess Cybele over from Turkey and Assyria, whatever, it brought her to Rome to defend Rome from, I forget who the fuck was invading at the time. But after the success and everything, there was a frenzied Bacchanalian worship celebration of the victory and of Cybele, of the goddess. And all new men came, and those who came up willingly invoked her, went into an ecstasy, a frenzy through her, and castrated themselves. Obviously, they still have their dicks; they just don't have their balls.
Right.
But and then offered the balls into the fire to her, and then they would dress pretty. They didn't dress completely in drag. They just were able to dress. They were allowed to then dress pretty. And the reason I say that is because in Rome, Roman culture was still about virility and masculinity. That if you were a boy, you were a male over there, and you fucked other dudes. That was fine. But you weren't allowed to be pretty. If you were pretty, then you had to get your ass over to the goddess temples.
Right.
Like, and then usually, like I said, you would be a sacred prostitute with the priestesses, like in a lot of these, and or you would be virginal, and maybe not castrate yourself, but you would be virginal if the goddess or god deity demanded virginity. Like, but or goddess, not the god, but goddesses would demand virginity. Then maybe you wouldn't castrate, but again, you're usually queer. It was pretty much, if you were a man, you were not allowed to serve in the goddess temples unless you were a man. But that's because they also saw homosexuality and queerness and these things. The more effeminate, the more you were touched by the divine feminine. So you were seen as anointed. So there was a whole other class there back then about being homosexual and serving in these, and queer, and serving in these temples. Yes, you were kind of pushed out of society still, but you were still seen as magical, other, exalted, and could serve. So I just think that, like, it's really important to get all that out there. And so I loved her for bringing attention to queer witchery.
Exactly.
And so it's really disappointing to just see this. Her social media is completely scrubbed of any reference to HEKA-TEA.
Exactly.
And like I said, I went back.
Yeah, you did.
Like, and to be honest, I didn't really see much about it before her win. So it's
that's another thing too. Actually, that's a good point.
Were you making boons here and just making promises? Because again, HEKA-TEA is one of those, like, you don't just, like, I rarely just show up if you call on me.
Right.
Usually I'm choosing you. Again, like I've famously talked about, HEKA-TEA came to me from my various early understandings as a child of what a witch was. And so we're talking when I was like 2-3 years old.
Right.
Like, she started working her way into me, so that by the time I was like 7-8 years old, I knew who she was, and then from there I just secretly grew and continued to learn about her growing up until I was 13 and publicly not only came out as gay, but came out as a witch. Right. And basically have lived openly in her name since then. And to this day, my relationship understanding with her deepens. And I can go back and read the same histories, the same texts, and learn new things to this day that I didn't catch the first time because I wasn't ready to learn it then. Exactly. And now she's showing it to me. So there is a whole, like, process. So to see that, and then to go back and see that not only are you now like HEKA-TEA who, but you've scrubbed your references to her. Any praise you've given her, you have scrubbed from your social media. And it breaks my heart. Like, deity hopping for whatever purpose, whether it's super self-serving, and that's it. Look, and yes, people write witchcraft books, worship books on deities. So you could be like, well, aren't they earning money? Yeah, but it's not the same thing. Their purpose is to get the knowledge out there to other witches, to other pagans, or potential witches and potential pagans who need to wake up, who need to discover it. It's about sharing of knowledge. Jinx really has shared no knowledge. There was gratitude in earlier posts constantly to HEKA-TEA for her achievements up until a certain point, which now has been scrubbed away. And yeah, I'm disappointed. I'm just disappointed. And it just further makes us look ridiculous. Yeah. That we have no commitment, that we have no dedication to anything, yet we claim we're so devoted, so spiritual, but we look like, I don't know, we're not taking things, we don't take what we worship seriously, or who we worship seriously.
I mean,
keep an eye out,
Anyway.
see how this goes, how, you know, maybe she'll latch on to Demeter next, or she seems really to go for what is Grecian pantheon, even though, to be honest, HEKA-TEA was around a lot longer and before ancient Greece, and like whatever, before she even got there, she was already someplace else. So, but it seems like she's fixated on the Grecian pantheon. So who knows? Maybe Persephone, Demeter,
I feel like Persephone.
Nemesis will be.
I feel like Persephone is gonna be where she goes.
It'll be the next fragrance or something. So yeah, all right. We will keep an eye on that. Next, we are going to, of course, discuss the actual main topic, which is the Vernal Equinox, or Ostara. The whole reason we have bunny ears on, and this beautiful altar, which we'll go into a further description of when we come back from this short break. We're back.
We are.
Thank you. We had to, you know, use the restroom and stretch and refresh our mugs. So cheers.
Cheers.
Yeah. So to the main story, as again you can see from the ears, from our pastels, but Debbie, pastels, and the altar / dining table scape for the season. That it is the Vernal Equinox, and as promised, we have a lot of fun facts and things to talk about. Yeah, I love this time of year.
I do too. I mean, as a spring baby, like, how could I not, of course.
Right.
But I always feel, like, very, just more invigorated during, like, the whole first quarter of the year. So, like, January through April. Like,
yeah.
I never feel more productive than I do during this time.
Yeah, I love, like, for me, it's, like, I really love, like, the magic of, like, spring and like animals are like dew on leaves and like the sun glistening. Like,
oh my gosh, when I was coming over to your house today, I was noticing the dew on the grass, and it literally looked like glitter.
Yes,
it was so pretty.
And it's just that like spring feeling of just possibility, and the young flowers are letting their perfume out, and it's just amazing. And it's just a great time of year. And I just, as a kid, of course, loved Easter baskets and getting treats. And
see, when I was a kid, I was like, you know, because I grew up in like a place where it snows 9 months of the year.
Right.
So I actually hated my birthday season because it just would usually always be snowing. Like, I would always pray that spring break would fall like on my birthday week, because if it did, we would be going to visit my grandparents in Texas, and I would be swimming in the pool, soaking up the sun in my element.
Yes. Yeah. I've always loved this time of year, and you know, we have the great like debate. Well, Christians took Easter from us, and it's really Ostara, the Vernal Equinox, and you know, we honor the goddess Ostara, and she is the queen of Easter and of the hair and the equinox and blah blah blah. Kinda yes and no. There are some things about Easter that begin and end with Christianity, and that like there is no pagan claim to. Other things, it's more like there were other traditions, other things, other deities at the time, and earlier in the calendar around the same time, Brede or Bridget being a prime example, and she was just, her veneration mythology was kind of shifted down. So anyway, we'll get into all of that. So the name Easter in itself is pagan. So it is rooted from Eostre, which is a goddess that we know very little about, and her name is derivative of the East, and in German, Eostre is Ostara. Now, a single record of Eostre exists, and it's from a monk and historian / scholar named Bede, the Venerable Bede. He was a prolific writer, keeper of obscure and odd knowledge and practices of cultures past and present for his time. He references Eostre in his book, The Reckoning of Time. Bede is listing off the names of the month, and he refers to March as, I'm going to butcher this, Heretha Monas, which is named for the goddess Heretha. And at this time in March is when ritual and offerings will be made to her. He then lists April as the Eostre Monas for the goddess Eostre. He then states that during this month, April, there would be great feasts held in honor and celebration of Eostre. He states that this is now the Paschal month, so the month of the month of the rise and the crucifixion and rebirth, rise of the holy risen Sun, S-O-N, not Sun, S-U-N, like Mithra, or Dionysus. Anyway, so he mentions that this is now the Paschal month, but it still bears the name of this older pagan tradition and goddess. Now, Bede, though, being a Catholic and a monk who was later canonized into sainthood, was still doing PR for the church, and not wanting to encourage continued or renewed worship of the old ones, Bede basically avoids going into details of what these practices entailed for any of these deities. And the reason we know that was probably on purpose is because any other innocuous thing in that book, Bede is descriptive of, like super descriptive, explanatory. But when it comes to reference to pagan deities, he's very, very minimal. The irony for all of this, though, is that he alone, who again is a monk and later was canonized into sainthood, is solely responsible for the preservation of the goddesses HEKA-TEA and Eostre. This is important because with deities, and I talk about this again in my Blackmore book series, shameless plug, available where all books are sold. As long as deities' name survives, they too will, no matter how weak they are. Deities need to be fed, they need to be worshipped, blah, blah, blah. They can weaken. But as long as a deity's name exists, it's not forgotten, and it goes through history, that deity will survive, and a lot of times will morph, adopt, synchronize with the new form, projection, marriage, which I think is what we have, is what's happening now with this. So Jacob Grimm, from the Brothers Grimm, in his book Teutonic Mythology, Grimm goes into the meaning of HEKA-TEA, which means Gloria, but aside from giving us a goddess of triumph and brightness, we get nothing more from him. With the Eostre, Grimm notes that in Germany, April is Ostramenath, and here Grimm deduces by etymological synchronicities and phonetic syncs that Eostre was celebrated throughout, and she was probably a fertility goddess given her time on the calendar, and that the Germans may have worshipped her as Ostara, because it denotes from Eostre. He also notes this means east, and that to the east, in the Nordic countries, is a masculine dwarf god named Eostre. And then he denotes that the female of Eostre would be Ostara. So Ostara, Eostre. To note, though, Grimm was proudly a German nationalist and was trying to develop a German-centric mythology that could unite all of Germany in that whole region. Grimm notes that the name, which means east, and the sun rises in the east, and given the time of the year when celebrated, that she was more than likely some type of radiant springtime / sun goddess. He also notes that also during this time, huge bonfires would be lit, and so this may have had to do with her worship.
All right. So to kind of echo everything that you said, obviously this is a time in the calendar year that is heavily associated with the rebirth of the earth, the fertility of the earth, the arrival of spring, new life. Goddess Ostara was certainly no exception to that in an old Germanic legend, which not necessarily tied to her, but given the context, I think that it's likely this is attributed to her.
Right, more than likely given the
Yes. So there was a goddess that had the head and shoulders of a hare, but then the body of a woman, and she was often depicted as like naked and pregnant.
Okay.
And then she had her hair head, and that so there would be images of this goddess. That's where people would leave their offerings to her to pray for a more fertile spring with the crops. Actually, interestingly, there was also a tradition of burying eggs inside of the earth so that the crops would have a more healthy year, which I think is really interesting. And
and you see that repeated throughout other countries.
Oh yeah, definitely. And I think like one thing that's interesting about that, which kind of goes back to this image of the goddess in a pregnancy phase that also has a hare head. An early version of like the Easter hare tale involved that the Easter hare could fertilize itself.
Oh.
Yeah, so definitely just kind of a good allegory for the earth at this time.
Yeah.
And oddly enough, the first mention of specifically the Easter bunny as like an egg hiding entity was actually all the way back in 1683.
Okay, so fairly recent in a lot of ways.
Yeah. But
also not
because I was actually surprised by this because you really don't see a lot of like depictions of the Easter bunny
before the Victorian era. Yeah. No, that's true.
So I was surprised to learn that there was a reference that long ago, although obviously that evolved from centuries of tradition. So another thing that I kind of wanted to get into was the plants and flowers that are associated with the season.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. So of course that that gets into like our hearth witchery.
Yes.
So these are like all of the, well, not all, but these are a good selection of the flowers that are associated with bringing in good luck and abundance at this time of year. So the first one is primrose. It has long been considered to be a harbinger of spring. It will be one of those first plants that do start to flower. interestingly enough, it's also connected with the Fae folk.
Yes, it is.
So like the legend goes that if you ate like a petal or a blossom, you would see a fairy.
Ooh, yes, I have read that in one of my fairy books.
And it's also has been always used to like encourage blessing of the home. So people would plant them like outside of their gates to you know, ward off evil and to bring in blessings and positivity. And then of course there is as well the belief in the medieval era that primrose both dispelled bad luck and also attracted prosperity into the home.
Nice.
And then, of course, there's rosemary. We're
yes,
very familiar with that. Love it. It has been said, again, in the medieval era to ward off bad dreams, as well as banishing evil from the house.
Yeah.
And then there are more practical aspects of it as well. Like it will dispel like pests from getting into your garden because of like the strong scent that kind of throws them off and confuses them. So it's interesting that as a banishing herb, it works in both physical and metaphysical ways.
Well, not only that, but because of the confusion it causes, you can use, I shouldn't be saying, I'm such a naughty witch, but because of that aspect of it, you can use that in spells to confuse, befuddle, make someone forget something, erase a memory from someone. Now, let's be clear, it's not like zip and it's like, oh, what? But whatever the incident, it just will quickly fade from their mind, or like very into the back of their mind, they'll get over it, whatever. And as long as it's not brought up, the spell keeps it all the way, the memory, whatever it is, all the way back there. So yeah, that's interesting.
Yeah. Ostara as a festival was actually a movable festival throughout history. Of course, obviously corresponding with the spring equinox.
Yeah.
It was celebrated traditionally on the first full moon after the spring equinox.
Okay.
So not falling on the actual equinox itself, but it was, sort of like, Mardi Gras and Easter,
Right.
So I thought that was interesting. And of course, Ostara as the festival, it represents the high point of spring. So as we talked about in the Inbolg special, Imbolc is what kicks off the springtime. This is sort of the peak of springtime, which obviously descends as we get into the summer season. So right now, for the first occasion of two that we have through the year, the sunlight hours and the nighttime hours are of equal length. So that happens with the vernal equinox, and then it happens with the autumnal equinox as well. And I thought
I don't know why I said ooh, if I didn't know that.
Right?
Ooh, as if I didn't know that.
But this is actually interesting. I didn't know this before we started researching. But going back into, the pre-Christian times, when they would celebrate Ostara, a lot of the times it would fall during the third month of the year, and it would be celebrated at 3:33 p.m., which is when the sun would be at its peak during the day. So I thought that was interesting, given the connection with those goddesses and HEKA-TEA.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, like the threes. I thought that was very telling. I thought that was an interesting tie into HEKA-TEA, and especially like you were saying, she is known as the bringer of the dawn.
Yes.
I found links with Eostre to her, as well as Holda and Freya.
Yes.
Which I think all of those goddesses, they do kind of have a similar energy to them.
They do.
And then also what I found interesting as well was that the festival itself, through like the Roman times, was connected with both Aurora, the goddess of the dawn, as well as Flora, whose festival Florelia was in April.
Yes.
So I thought that was very interesting. And speaking of eggs, there is one other tradition that I thought was really interesting around this time of year. So starting in around the 4th century, in Catholicism, people would bring baskets of eggs to their church to be blessed for fertility purposes. And oddly enough, that is a tradition in Catholic culture that has really lasted and is still practiced to this day.
Which is really pagan.
Yeah, very
like
much
old school pagan.
Yes.
In fact, in Greece, speaking of something like that, in Greece, they would and will still do, a lot of them still do that. They do this by painting Christian symbols on red dyed eggs. And the red dye symbolizes the blood of Christ. And from there, they go from home to home, exchanging these, sharing blessings for the new year. And now, and we'll get into this more when we do our egg magic, but the Ukrainian tradition has an egg tradition that goes back like thousands of years painting eggs, thousands of years before Christianity, and then Christianity showed up pretty late in the game to Ukraine, and that's kind of when we see like the Christian painting of the eggs is after the Ukraine thing. But now, however, in Greece, going back to the ancient times, for example, with HEKA-TEA, again, HEKA-TEA being from the east, she comes from far off, and her roots are in Turkey and in Assyria, and she's a far off Eastern. She's from the east, and the sun rises in the east. She brings the dawn. In Greece, HEKA-TEA's offerings, and still are many springtime associated foods. So there would be meats of lamb, goats, rabbits. There'd be herbs like sage, mint, lavender, and saffron, chive, violet. You give her honey, cheese, milk, garlic. You make honey cakes and pomegranate cakes, beans and other legumes. And even in Greek mythology, she still, even though by the time she got to Greece, HEKA-TEA kind of got demoted, she is still the dawn bringer. She brings forth spring by bringing Persephone to and from Hades. She brings the seasons. But again, this was long after her demotion. Whereas when she was the Great Mother, as the Great Mother of ancient times, before she got to Greece and got demoted, she was the anima mundi, and in HEKA-TEA, she anoints her fiery flower of creation upon the world, lighting the force of the season. And eggs being a symbol of rebirth and renewal, the chicks being in a liminal space, which HEKA-TEA guards the liminal spaces, between death and rebirth in the shell, is kind of, it holds great significance for her. So I just find that, really interesting that, because how that, in a way, now I'm not saying, Eostre is actually, or Ostara is actually HEKA-TEA. It's the example of giving where there are other deities around this time who come from, either they have celebrations at this time of year, they are geographically close, or they come from etymologically what the name means, the east. They're a force from the east, whatever, where the sun comes. There's all of these deities that pre-existed, that have all these traits that we've kind of seen come into what is really a fairly neo-pagan Ostara celebration, spring equinox. I mean, if you were really to celebrate Eostre, the actual goddess, correctly, you would be celebrating her in April. Right. At Easter time. You would be celebrating her in April. Now you'd be celebrating Hera, probably Freya.
Unfortunately,
and we can't much
really
about
celebrate Hera because we don't know anything about her.
No, because, again, Bede was afraid that if he gave too much knowledge of description of the deities and the practices, somehow his readers would be called. His readers would be inspired to pick up the practice again. And, they were still working through the centuries. I mean, granted, they were, kind of in it a few hundred years, but they were still in the early stages of trying to really establish Christianity as the one and only thing. Yeah. And so, we didn't, unfortunately, luckily we got her name, and hopefully historians like Bethany Hughes, who I love, will uncover more about her.
I really hope that one day we'll be sitting here filming and we'll get to talk about that discovery in she knew.
Because exactly, and I think that, we see how goddesses and God sync and merge, and HEKA-TEA is like adjoined with like everybody. Right. And and she goes all the way back to the ancient known recorded goddess Cybele. And, but then that evolved. People don't really worship Cybele anymore. Yeah. And hadn't for a long, by the time we get to ancient Rome did, but by the time we get into Christianity, really in those first few centuries, Cybele and the cult of Cybele's kind of, she's eroded, she's disappeared. They become absorbed. And so I think we see with this myth of Eostre and with the Eostre idea or myth of what we see it's a merging, a synchronicity of, I think, Bridget. There's Ellen of the Wood. Ellen of the Wood is a pretty, I came across her actually in my research of this. She's a primordial, again, liminal between the villages and the forest. She has deer antlers. Her symbol is the hare. She's wild. She's fierce. There's a lot of things there where she holds a position that HEKA-TEA could hold, honestly. Yeah. But she's also got these very she's naturey, rabbity deer, very I just think there's a lot going on. Flora. Yeah. Just a lot of drawing from different goddesses of that time that have come into the myth of creating the Ostara that we were, and I really want to say it's Ostara. Yeah. I think this is a case where, this is a case of an actual egregore. Right. Because so many pagans and witches and heathens, etc., throughout the decades now, and possibly, maybe century long now, maybe, but not really more than that, have believed in her and worshipped
Yes.
her and made offerings to her and consolidated these aspects and synced and created Ostara.
Yeah.
But Eostre is not Ostara. And Eostre, again, we know more about her than HEKA-TEA, but not by much. And I think that if we want to honor Eostre, they do it in April.
Yeah.
And look more, step out of this and step more into what the goddesses of April, how they were venerated.
Yes.
And especially think regionally,
Mm-hmm.
and what in the surrounding regions closest to how those goddesses of the spring were celebrated. And from there you can craft, I would say not obviously authentic, but a more authentic ritual to Eostre, the
Right.
actual goddess, than Ostara.
Right.
Because this is Ostara,
Yeah.
which, again, she's an egregore. She's a genuine egregore.
Yeah.
She exists. But this is more honoring HEKA-TEA in my home as the maiden form. This is honoring HEKA-TEA Crataeus, HEKA-TEA of the sun. So, yeah, there are the images of Easter and shit, because I love that. And of fertility, the harvest, Easter eggs, pastels, the colors. Like, I love it all. And I'm honoring the vernal equinox.
Yeah.
But I don't honor Ostara, to be honest.
No, I don't either.
I would probably be more adept, and I might actually start putting together something to honor Eostre.
Yeah.
I just think that hey, it gives something that gives a celebration for April.
Exactly.
You know what I mean? Like,
Other than me.
other than you and your birthday. Yes, other than you. So yeah, I just think.
I am. Yeah. No, I'm just kidding.
Oh God, we're going there. So yeah, I think that. Oh, and well, yeah. And speaking of, before I continue, let me give you a tour of this altar so you can see it up close. And here it is, all lit up. Just so you can get a really good look with it now that it's darker, dimmer, etc. Isn't it so pretty? The Mercury egg in the middle, all lit up. Such a beautiful altar. Hope you guys like that. And again, like I just said in the tour of the altar, hares are so significant because especially in the UK, Ireland, things like that, in Europe, hares, and even in colonial, well, I mean, it'd be rabbits, not really hares, but there was a belief in anyways in the English and European idea of witches that hares, rabbits, were actually witches in disguise. So, you know, you wouldn't risk killing one because it might be your neighbor. So with that being said, it's time to do a little spellcraft, and it's a little different this time because we're not just gonna tell you about a spell and read a spell to you. We're actually gonna do a demonstration.
Yeah.
And I'm excited to see how many eggshells we don't break.
Yeah.
So pray for us.
Yes.
And enjoy.